And it's all blended together, like the ideas of spirituality and aliens and spirits and shadow people and oneness of the universe. And oh my gosh, it's just, it does make you wonder, you know, you're like, either this is completely cuckoo or it's a little true. There's just no other way to see it, I think.
All right, welcome to the NewAgeHuman podcast. I'm your host, John Astasio. Today, we are talking with Meredith Edwards. She's the host of the Curious Introvert podcast. I spoke with her and I met her at an event recently, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if, since we both talk about fringe science and paranormal topics, that we can go over our favorite episodes so you can take advantage and skip around on both of our podcasts if something catches your attention. So stick around for the whole episode because I'll give you a sneak peek. We talk about a psychic marine, a doctor who studies religion and tech and UFOs, and a man who ate his foot. Now, before we begin, all I ask is if you can give us a review on Apple Podcasts. I know that helps out with getting more reach and getting more people to listen in and know about the show. And lastly, actually more importantly, join the Telegram channel for NewAgeHuman because we discuss more topics beyond the show that you would be interested in if you like the content. And what I'm looking for is for you to share what topics are more interesting to you and what do you think you need help with. Without further ado, let's go. So you're the Curious Introvert, and which is curious, but we were just talking about how let's have a conversation around the interesting people that we have conversations with, because sometimes you leave the conversation and you're like, what just happened?
Yeah, it's like your whole life is different. Not your whole day. It's like you do things differently. Every time I talk to someone, especially in the health and wellness space, you know, my husband's like, what are we doing or not doing now? Because I'm always like, babe, I just learned, fill in the blank with the thing I just learned, and then I enforce it.
Oh, so I can imagine like you learning about one thing that when I met you at Podfest, you had barefoot sandals. And when you heard about that, was that one of those things where you were like forcing your husband to be like, you know what, you need to get new shoes because this, and that? Like, did that ever happen?
No, I haven't said anything about, you know, his footwear, but no, I interviewed Sue Kenny. She's known as Barefoot Sue in episode 130. And in preparing for that episode, you know, the episode is not just the episode, right? The episode is the part of the glacier that everyone sees, but underneath there's all this other stuff. And so I did all this research about the mechanics of our feet and the pros and cons of modern footwear. And around that time, I'd also had a foot injury from wearing shoes. And so I thought, it was actually March of 2022. And I thought, this is a good time to, you know, try barefooting. And so I didn't wear shoes as much as I could. I went to the grocery store barefoot. I ran errands barefoot. So I didn't impose that on my husband, but he does have to tolerate me being barefoot in situations that are less socially acceptable. And buying those barefoot sandals that you saw me wearing is kind of the exception, because although I would love to go barefoot at a conference, I don't necessarily want to talk about it with every single person. I don't want it to be the center of conversation about my feet. So I have the barefoot sandals as a kind of in between.
Okay. It reminds me, I have an episode that I brought it on, but I want to bring the guy back on. It was like the fourth episode in, and he was talking about a story where his father stepped on a nail. And because he stepped on a nail, he couldn't lift his arm past his shoulder. And it was interesting how those two seemingly wouldn't be related, but your foot is connected to everything, all the nerves, the muscles, everything's connected. And it made me want to get another pair of barefoot shoes because it's a different experience. And it helps with your posture. It helps with a lot of things. Is there anybody specifically that you thought would be an interesting person to chat about or to bring up?
So the show is actually Meredith for Real, the Curious Introvert. It's a social science show. So social science is a big umbrella. And so there's a lot to play with there, which is great because when I was learning about podcasting, I couldn't find one show that was kind of educational, that was kind of entertaining, that wasn't too highbrow, etc., and that didn't just talk about the same thing every single week. And so that was part of what inspired me to create this variety show. I have since discovered the Jordan Harbinger show, which is obviously fantastic. It's number one in his category and very similar, it turns out, to mine, or I'm similar to his because he's the veteran, right? So half of the episodes are with people who are very paradoxical, like they shouldn't exist. And then the other half is asking questions that people think, but they don't say out loud, maybe because they're taboo or because of cultural hypnosis. So the one example that I want to give on the paradoxical side is with Dr. Bruce Greyson. He is an atheist doctor who studied near-death experiences for 50 years. Yeah, you're like, that should not be a thing.
No.
That is so weird, right? And so that's episode 93. And I read his book cover to cover, and I can confidently say it really changed my life because I was afraid of death. And that book has convinced me that regardless of, your religious framework or your spiritual framework, there is something on the other side of death. And I feel like, oh, wow, that'll be a cool place to go.
Be careful with that one.
Right. Well, it's really interesting. The University of Virginia has all these, it's just like a podcaster's dreamland. They study near-death experiences, past life regression from accounts of children, just all kinds of really cool stuff up there. And so not only did it help me personally not be afraid of death, but it really opened my eyes to how, I'll say, connected all of our theories and thoughts are in the world around us, right? Because we tend to, bifurcate ourselves, like, I'm on this side, you're on that side. But, really it's the same thing. It's all a part of the same place, and there's really not sides. And that's what's just really cool about podcasting is it gives you so many opportunities for greater perspective than just when you're in your day-to-day, which is kind of what I call the algorithm, right? Because we have a digital algorithm and it does trap us, if you will, into a bubble of same thinking, our same thinking compared to those with the people we're connected with. And then we have like this physical algorithm where we're just naturally drawn to people who are similar to us, and that's okay. But you do miss out when you don't put yourself in situations where you can listen to people who have different experience, different knowledge than you. So, I mean, that's for me. I'm curious to hear about what you have found, because your show is much more into, what might be labeled fringe science, right? And so you've got like way more, stuff in your catalog that would be different than mine.
I do have an episode that I want to bring up, which is like perfectly aligned with what you just mentioned. But I have to ask, the atheist doctor that worked with near-death experiences, like, did he at least acknowledge that there's somewheres that people go? It does sound like he thinks of it more of like a Matrix type of thing, if I was in his head.
Yeah, I asked him how it's impacted his, spiritual theories. And he said he definitely believes that death is not the end. And he said, that's about all. That's about all I can say concretely, because he is a true scientist. And that's what I respected about him so much, is he is constantly scrutinizing his own conclusions. And that's what true science is not just yelling, trust the science, and then don't question me, don't question it, but instead questioning yourself, questioning, why do I think this? How long have I believed this to be true? Why do I believe this to be true? And so all he said was, death is not the end, and that's all I know. So maybe that doesn't categorize him as a true atheist. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's hard to put a category on that. I would say he's a curious person. He's a curious, very left brain leaning person. as in he's having a hard time trying to put facts with something that that's untangible. He's trying to grasp something. He's trying to grab air at this point. So it's very interesting to see that. But I'm happy to hear that there's people in that situation that are still going, and they didn't make a decision and stick with it. They're continuing to go because there's so much to learn. But the episode that I wanted to bring up was episode 17, where I pretty much get back into contact with my deceased brother from beyond the grave through the interview of a paranormal psychic detective.
Okay, I know this is not a contest, John, but you just won.
No. Honestly, I think it just means that I dove in the rabbit hole and just like you don't even see feet anymore. That's how far it went.
Yeah.
We did an episode first, and we chatted about her experience as a psychic detective, where visually she tries to find missing people. And they reach out to her, the detectives, and she has people she works with so that they can find someone. And while people are using dogs in the neighborhood, she's just kind of like seeing visions of somebody who's deceased communicating with her, which was nuts. And so I was like, let's do a follow-up. I want to see if we can get some information from my brother. And for context, my father's side, he literally is a brother from another mother, right? Same father, different moms. He was in a different state. We grew up in different, households. And so I wasn't as connected with him. And so when he passed, there was a lot of empty information, right? Missing information. So I would reach out to my siblings to confirm the information that the psychic was giving me. So, and then you can say, well, John, social media is a thing. She could probably just be following the dude, researched you, she just has his name. That's it. Right. No, he was so bad with social media that whenever he got a new phone, he would have a new Facebook account, thinking that it was what you had to do. He wouldn't log back in. Yeah. So there was nothing. So it was pretty crazy because it's not that often that you have a conversation with a psychic outside of a fair, right? Or watching it on TV. I couldn't deny the fact that she did bring up specifics of where he lived, where he grew up. And I learned more about my brother through her, which is the most weirdest thing. What are your thoughts on that? Do you even think that's possible? What are your thoughts on the paranormal? Have you had experience of that, or does it bring up a memory that you experienced, or a show? I'm just curious.
No, I haven't had any remarkable paranormal experiences. I think that's so cool that you got to get to know your brother post-mortem, though. I mean, that's pretty incredible, especially that you had to, just take the data that she was giving you and then go double check about that. That's a really interesting. I wrote down episode 17. I'm going to go listen to that episode because I want to know what she said to you. No, I interviewed Jose Herrera in episode 152, and he was a psychic and the psychic Marine, basically. He's a Marine that I guess the U.S. government trains lots of military personnel, but especially Marines, to be in touch with their psychic abilities. However, this is so interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because... And I'm saying this in response to your question because this has made me think about my senses, I'll say, right? And so he said that being air quote psychic has, we'll say, two sides to it. One is situational awareness, the kind of environmental observations that give you data that because our noses are in our phones, we are not privy to. But it's the kind of observational awareness that is heightened in people who spend a lot of time in nature. So he said that the Marines would try to recruit people who had hunting experience because hunters have an elevated level of situational awareness that they found very critically helpful on the ground when they were he was in Afghanistan. And I thought that was really interesting. And so half of it was that. And he said half of it is somehow from another place, and we don't know where it's from. But I believe it was him who quoted someone else who said, the universe is like ones and zeros. It's data. And so if you think of the data, the information in the universe as a giant Google, and you can go, I wonder how Uncle Ben is doing. And then all of a sudden, you get a call from Uncle Ben, right? It's like you Googled Uncle Ben to the universe, and then it brought you Uncle Ben. And so all of that information together has been really interesting for me. And so I've really tried to use it in practical ways for decision making. And so that's about as spooky as my life gets. Although there is a ghost cat in my house.
Wait.
Every once in a while I see a cat and I'm like, yeah, it's a ghost. But it's out of the corner of my eye. And I don't think it's a big deal. But but that was a hard turn. Sorry there, John.
Yes. That's great. That's great. Do you see like okay. Do you see a tail? Let me start with the cat. Do you see a tail, or like how do you know it's a cat? Is it like the meow, or you said it's in the corner
There's
of your eye? So no sound.
Yeah, it's in the corner of my eye. It's just a knowing. Sometimes I do have knowings. Yeah, I forgot about that. Anyway, I'm bad, John. You got to keep me on track because I'm like ADHD all over the place.
I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. The knowings.
Yeah, you just know, like, oh, that's a cat. Like, I just knew ever since we moved in here, which is almost 10 years ago, I would just see a cat out of the corner of my eye. Like, you know how cats try to run away real fast? Like, to say they're crossing from one area of the room to the other, and they want to do it before you can see them. So they just dash. Do you know what I'm talking about? I don't have any cats.
I have a cat. They're just buck wild, and they're just knocking things over and scattering around, running. So that is very real. And yes, it's like the cat's doing parkour all night, jumping off the walls. And maybe in your home, there was a cat that did die, and it's sticking around because I believe that's possible.
Because we have ghost mice, apparently. I mean, why else would it stick around?
That's a weird question, like ghost animals, you don't hear too much of that. It's more people,
Right. People would make more sense. I don't know why. I have Googled it, so other people have experienced that, specifically cats. But I'm like, it's not. I mean, it doesn't. I don't feel, nothing in my gut is like, this is a problem. I'm just like, my computer, oh, there's the cat. And I mentioned it very casually to my husband one day. He's like, these are things you should tell me. He's like, how long has this been going on? I was like, since we moved in. He's like, that was 9 years ago. Please tell me if you see any more apparitions.
By the way.
I'm like, oh, yeah. So one day I came up to him. I was like, hey, remember when you told me that if I see that ghost cat, I should tell you? And he's like, yeah. I said, okay, I just saw it. He's like, oh, I have so many questions. And I was like, I don't have any answers. I'm just keeping my promise to tell you that I saw it.
So that's actually pretty cool. It's cool that you have that relationship where he's like, let me know. I want to know. Yeah. I did want to go back to the interview you had with the ex-military guy. And it does sound like, you said psychic, but it sounds like remote viewing. Is that close to what he was talking about, or more of like psychically intuitive psychicness?
I think it was more intuitive, although we know from declassified documents. I'm laughing because I never get to talk about this stuff really on my show.
Let's go
to this level. That remote viewing, as far as like military training, has definitely been a thing in the past. As is, what's the thing called when you sleep and then you leave your body?
Out of body experience.
Astral projection. Okay, yeah. So like they tried to train soldiers or just people to do that as well. That to me is completely fascinating. I would love to learn how to do that. I'm not sure where I'd go. I'd probably just be at Walgreens, like something lame. Like I'll just grocery shop while I'm here.
Yeah.
You know,
what
like
a
I'm going to the
fantastic
library.
dream and experience.
Yeah, I mean, I should go somewhere cool, but it's mostly just knowing. Like he would say, "Hey guys, I have a feeling that you know he had lots of jargon I didn't recognize. I think he said 20 clicks that way or something like that.
Okay.
He's like, I just have a feeling that something is going to happen there. Let's instead go this way." And then they would make whole decisions with their group based on gut instincts from him and other members of his group.
It's fascinating that something that you would see in a movie that's considered science fiction is actually happening in real life. And like you said, things are being disclosed that it's been known already. People are trained on it, and people are taking risks and making really important decisions on that stuff.
Life and death decisions.
Yes. So imagine being part of like this crew of guys, and you barely know about this stuff, but you got one guy who's apparently a psychic, and you're in the enemy territory, and he's like, "I think something bad is going to go on. 20 clicks to the right. Let's go left." And you're like, "All right, let's go." Like that's a lot of trust.
And you know what's fascinating is stories like Jose's is it blends with lots of other paranormal, what we consider paranormal phenomenon. When he was in Afghanistan is so freaking cool. Like there's so much there. But he would talk about lights. He would talk about Sasquatch type situations. Like just so there's so much, and and then it's all blended and then do you know who Chris Bledsoe is? Bledsoe?
No.
Do you know? Okay, so in episode 148, I interviewed Dr. Diana Walsh Pasulka, who studies the intersection between religion, technology, and UFOs. Right?
Awesome.
You would love her. Her book is called American Cosmic. 10 out of 10 would recommend, because she takes an academic approach, but she's very open-minded, and she has this interesting, framework of, those intersections that I mentioned. So it creates it just gives you a new perspective. But one of the first people that she interviewed was Chris Bledsoe, Bledsoe. And he has some crazy stories that's like every single paranormal phenomenon you can think of has happened to him, except for, I haven't read his full book yet, but Sasquatch, except for that. And it's all blended together, like the ideas of spirituality and aliens and spirits and shadow people and oneness of the universe. And oh my gosh, it does make you wonder, you're like, either this is completely cuckoo or it's a little true. There's just no other way to see it, I think.
It's one of those things where if 1% of it is factual, then holy cow, right? Just 1%, right? If you can just prove that one of these vehicles was not from Earth, that opens the door for so many other things. There's an episode that I have, it's called Down the Rabbit Hole. There's like part 1, part 2, because we just went bananas. And episode 10, and he brings up the Men in Black, which was pretty cool. And he brought up a video that he saw that they were technically actually captured on video, and it's on YouTube. But we go and we dive into stuff like that. I think we talk about aliens, we talk about similar stuff. And I love talking about that stuff. And I am looking for more people to talk about that stuff, because it's like, why not? It's cool to question stuff. Have you ever heard of Tartaria?
No.
Ooh. Oh, man. It's one of those episodes that I didn't put a number in front of it. But if you do a search for Tartaria, Matt Roeske. He has a huge following, and they love that episode. And it's a hidden civilization, talking about how potentially in the past we had better technology than we do have now. And there are signs of it in old architecture that they had electricity way back when, like hundreds of years ago, before we even put the first wire, before Benjamin got almost electrocuted by a kite in the storm. Like just like there, we go into that and how like there's so much mystery behind it. And speaking of CIA, hopefully maybe I'll have to censor that word, right? I don't think we went into this, but there's a document that that was disclosed by the CIA that talks about how Russia, back in communist times, when Russia was a communist country, they deliberately erased the history of this civilization because it was right next door to Russia, for reasons that this civilization, it was kind of like having the United States next to you, and you're trying to control everything, and you have too many free people, too many free thinkers, too many self-sufficient, high technology people next door, and you just want to cut that. And so it's very mysterious, and I love that subject matter.
So here's a question.
Yeah.
What do you personally do with all this information, right? Because, I think it's so easy to consume information like this. It's highly palatable. It's the processed food version of information, right? Because you're like, oh yeah, aliens, psychics, shadow people. I mean, it's like, Cheerios and Twinkies, basically. It's just so easy to eat, right? But then, like, what do you do with it? How do you prevent it from rotting your brain, right? Because I think that's the difference between like active and passive curiosity, but it's tricky in areas like fringe science to convert that into something that is concrete in your life. So I'm curious, like, how you convert that into something for yourself and for, to better yourself and society.
That's a really good question. And I'm glad you asked that, because people ask me, so what? Someone who's maybe not that interested. So what? And I'm like, well, one, if you forget about your past, then you're going to make a repeat mistake. You're going to make the same mistake if you don't know your past. And if a lot of your past is hidden from you, we're probably making a lot of mistakes that we shouldn't be making. That's one. Two, it stretches the mind so that you can think outside the box of what's possible, so that when you go to find a solution to something that goes on in today's world, you're thinking with a broader perspective of what's possible, so that when something does pop up and you're like, this seems like it's that's in no books right now. And people are doing that right now. And those are people that I'm working on finding more of, where they found something tangible and they're using it, right? These books of people that like Tesla, not the car, the actual guy, he talked about a lot of things, and people are bringing that back because there's better ways to do things that we're doing now that are more cost efficient and more environmentally friendly as well. So I see it as, broadening your horizons, making your mind be able to grasp more concepts so you have better solutions. Another thing is, when you said it's like the processed food of information, I thought of the idea of the term fear porn. Have you ever heard of the term fear porn? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Awesome. Where, yeah. So it's it's a scary, sensational title on social media, and you're like, oh my God, are we going to die tomorrow? Is there a meteorite coming? Are we going to get flooded? Like global warming, fear porn. Like, you're addicted to it because it's like, you need to know. And those things I try to tell people, be careful with. How do you feel when you're confronted with this information? Are you curious to know more, to find a better way of doing things? Or does it put you into a fear mentality, a fear-based energy, right? And from conversations and research, when you're in that fear-based mentality, that's that fight or flight mode, you are less logical, more emotional. So you're going to, everybody knows it's really bad to make emotional decisions. So, calm down, come back to it, reassess with a more balance, not necessarily all logic or all emotion, but you're in balance.
That's such a good point. That is I think that's so valuable to filter the information through that lens that you just described, because it increases your interoception, right? Your mind-body connectedness, and even beyond that, connected to your actions. Okay, are you about to just share that post about, aliens invading? Or are you going to Google it for, do some light background searching at least before you just post it? I think that's a nice, it's like everyone can set up personal protocols to help mitigate that sharing of fear porn and because the human brain is definitely, we're problem solvers. So when we don't have problems, unfortunately, with the internet, we seek them out, right? We used to invent things. Now we just get outraged on the internet and share it. And you got to be careful, You got to be careful, because that's, at the end of the day, that's your legacy. Nothing is permanent except for what's on the internet, as they say.
Yeah, right. And there's this website called the Wayback Machine where you can look up everything, which is kind of freaky. So some people get censored off and it gets somehow deleted from the interwebs, but if you're looking to find it, the Wayback Machine. So I just made the situation more worse. I'm so sorry.
I'm curious about that. I'm going to look that
up. Right? I'm like, the Wayback Machine, is that like a machine? No, it's just a website. It's just a website. But you brought up an interesting point, and it's a really good point. It's kind of like, for anybody listening, when you run into somebody that has some very outrageous claims and it's outside of your norm of conversation, how do you decide to filter out what to mention and what not to mention? And so I ask you, Meredith, how do you filter, who to interview, or what's your filtration process of just vetting somebody that's going to talk about something taboo that you're curious about?
For my show and for personally, I have different protocols. So personally, if I'm talking with someone and they are out there, they're just spouting facts. It's like, they've been locked up for 10 years and I'm the first human that they've seen. And so they're going to let me know all their opinions at once. Then I may, if they stop to breathe, go, oh, that's really interesting. How long have you felt that way? And then just kind of see where they go with that. That one question alone is very powerful, because it can bring them down, when some people work themselves up, don't you think?
Yeah. So how long have you felt that way? You actually gave them the opportunity to step out of the side of themselves and self-reflect, which is a great question, because yes, people go on a tangent and everything's connected, and then this, did you hear about that? And I'm going to steal that one because that's really good. That's really good because it's one of those one-liners that can bring someone back to present, right?
Yes.
Like a therapist.
Like a therapist, exactly. And then another one that I learned from a guest that I had on the show, Rob Baedeker, I can't remember the episode number, but he said, always engage in a conversation in a way that supports whatever your goal is for that conversation. If you're in an Uber, for example, and the Uber driver is just letting you know all of his political opinions and you believe those political opinions are incorrect, do you really think you're going to convert him in your 12-minute Uber ride? No. So instead, act like an anthropologist and seek to understand. So that can really guide a conversation that is, going wild. So that's on the personal side. I think those are great filters. On the podcasting side, I look for paradox and nuance. I think those are signs of credibility. Although some would argue that nuance and paradox are confusing. I wouldn't disagree with that statement, but I think that they make the person more credible. So, going back to Dr. Diana Walsh Pasulka, the fact that she has a PhD, is Catholic, converted from evangelical Christian, and has, studies UFOs. Like, I love all of that. You know what I mean? I think that lends to credibility. So I do end up having a lot of academics on my show, a lot of people PhD level, but that have some sort of odd paradox happening within their lives that cause it to not be the expected. So I really like the unexpected. And, I try to engage with people that have done a lot of research. I do like interviewing journalists as well. And I sometimes prefer them over academics because they have a more relatable way of speaking. And academics are used to giving presentations. And so they don't often take a breath. So I prefer, a little bit more of a back and forth conversation. So yeah, and I think at the end of the day, I really listen to my intuition. We were just talking about, having knowings and I think we're all born with that, and the ability to go, my gut tells me no, or my gut tells me yes. And in the end, I just feel drawn to something. It's almost like a forward feeling. If forward could be a feeling, that is how I feel when it's a yes. And so that's really the bottom line of how I decide to invite someone to be on the show or say yes to a pitch.
You just reminded me of something. There's a technique to understand if something's good or bad for you, or positive or negative, and it's literally leaning forward or leaning backwards.
Yeah, I know that one.
I was like,
I learned it at Podfest.
Nice.
Yeah. They were talking about facing. Is this the one where you face north?
I don't know the
and
specifics.
You ask, is this for my greatest good? And then if you lean forward, it's a yes, and you lean back, it's a no. What's so cool about that is it sounds so mystical, right? But here's what Jose Herrera, again, going back to episode 152, he's like, in your body the answer to so many questions. And it's like the part of our brain that argues with people, including ourselves, complicates the messaging. And so when you allow that messaging to just be quiet for a minute, your body will tell you yes or no. So he even tells you, he recommended some apps that help you feel your own heartbeat, like be in touch with a rising heartbeat. So you can tell if someone is bad news because your heartbeat is rising and it's like subtle, And okay, so that's don't go there, there's danger, or that's a no, right? And so all these little biological responses. So what I love about that method of making a decision is it's like a biological response. Sometimes you know what the answer is, but for reasons that are more complicated, refuse to admit it.
That's really cool. I'm definitely going to check out that episode because I'm definitely interested in that. Cool. Well, I know we can talk forever about this stuff, and it's insane how much we can learn from each other, how much we can learn from other people that think paradoxically, right? And then if anybody that's listening that has conversations with someone that thinks completely different from you, I hope that you got something from this and you're able to have another tool in your toolbox to filter out, right? Whether it be leaning forward, whether it be like, are they paradoxical? How do they feel about this, right? There's a lot to get from this. I think this was a very packed episode. I do appreciate you, Meredith Edwards, for coming on today. All three names. Make sure when you look her up, use all three names. Look up the Curious Introvert podcast. Is there anything else that you wanted to share that you might be working on, that you have a project on, or a fan favorite episode?
Ooh, I was okay until you said fan favorite. I would encourage people to listen to episode 93 with Dr. Bruce Greyson. I'm biased, but I really loved that episode. Yeah, I really loved that. And I'll recommend one more because it is a fan favorite. It's totally different. Episode 142 was with a man who chose to remain anonymous, who ate his own foot. He got in a motorcycle accident, and his foot had to be, really it was his leg, had to be amputated. And he chose to keep it and ceremoniously made tacos with him and his friends. And so he talks about the feeling around that and his like philosophy. And so that led me down a whole fun rabbit trail of cannibalism. So that one again is episode 142. So I'd recommend that. But yeah, other projects that I'm working on. I'm a podcaster for hire. So businesses that are looking to add a podcast to their brand will have me produce and sometimes host podcasts. So that's part of what's happening in my world.
Nice.
But, overall, I'd say, stay in touch with me on Instagram. I'm at Meredith for Real on Instagram. And you'll see everything that I have going on there.
Cool. So, foot tacos. I'm checking that one out. That is, yeah. I don't know what to say with that one. That one's pretty interesting. So thank you for sharing that. So thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.